What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch, and today I wanted to break it down some of the crazy strategies that the Dallas Fuel pulled out in the preseason. Now, the Fuel were formerly known as EnvyUs, a team that stayed competitive at the top of Overwatch across multiple metas, often with reinventing themselves, picking up key players to fill gaps in their roster. But one impressive thing about their playstyle is that they would often break the mold and play team compositions that most teams either wouldn't even try or couldn't pull off themselves. So it doesn't surprise me at all to see some different looks from them in the preseason, and we're going to break down two key compositions that they'll probably be showcasing in the beginning of Season 1 as well, and we'll pick apart why they work and what their goal is in using them.
You guys were running that triple support composition on Junkertown against Florida Mayhem. What was that supposed to do? Because as far as I can tell, it was doing nothing.
I have no idea what they're doing.
Now, the team comp did tragically fail on Junkertown, but it worked quite well on Ruins. Part of the reason why is that on the previous 2 rounds of EnvyUs, Taimu was running Widowmaker. So right out the gate, going into this first engagement, the Florida Mayhem are going to be suspecting the Widow and assuming they're going to need their own counter Widow, putting Zebosai on it and then only having a single healer on Florida's side. But what the Dallas Fuel's comp can do is really use this mobility to get in and out of the fight and set up for these burst engagements where the dive tanks come in, they get a burst of support from the Moira, and as long as the team comp can find the fight it wants, it can get into it really quickly. The problem is having enough punching power to be able to frag things down quickly, because putting a Zen in the support slot probably is just going to be a more reliable way to play. The problem is with Zen is that it creates a exploitable target for the enemy team, but the benefit of having the Moira is that your support can just dive in with the rest of the team and get in and out of the fight and be basically untouchable. And this retake kind of shows why this comp is a little bit difficult to play, because you kind of need to land all of your abilities on their ideal targets or else you can come up short. Here, Taimu EMPs the majority of the enemy team, but I don't believe he got the Mercy. And the Mayhem do a good job of catching this aggression, bursting down both Effect and Custa. If they don't lose Effect here, they probably just straight up win this fight, but because they do, it's a huge percentage of their damage, and even though Chip's high-end gets a pretty good Coalescence off, there's no answer for the Mercy Valk, and that just wins the game. If Valk is in the sky and you don't have an answer for it, which this team doesn't, I mean, they don't even have a character really that can deal damage to Mercy flying up in the sky. They sort of had to win the fight then and there and burst her with EMP. There's a big responsibility on Effect to carry and not die, and you need a player with as good of aim as Taimu has on the Sombra in order to maximize her damage output, because if the Sombra player doesn't aim perfectly, it's pretty easy to have her damage nullified by just some normal healing abilities. This oncoming retake from the Dallas Fuel, I think, really shows off what this swarm comp, I guess we could call it. It shows off what it's capable of, because Tavik sees the opening he wants, multiple enemy targets in a closed space, pulls out the Dragon Blade, but blink and you'll miss it, their team just evaporates into thin air. Not from dying, but because they have so many mobility options that the Dragon Blade just can't really catch anybody. And that's the boom or bust of this team comp. It's incredibly flimsy if a skill shot is landed on them, especially on one of their key members, but as long as they can keep swarming and circling their prey, they're eventually going to survive, find a kill, and then overwhelm it from there. It operates on some normal dive comp principles, but it actually reminds me a lot of the old school, no hero limit 2-2-2 comp with 2 Winstons, 2 Lucios, and 2 Tracers. The team fights looked quite similar, and this is almost a way to try to soft replicate that strat from back in the day, and a big aspect of the win condition is just dodging longer, avoiding damage, and you'll eventually find the critical damage on your side. As the Florida Mayhem come back in once again, let's just face it, Mercy's Valkyrie is quite a problem for them, and even though they sort of trade out the fight, they need to overwhelmingly win it, and that's going to be kind of the issue for this comp. I think you almost have to expertly land like an EMP Diva bomb to get a few kills, because if Effect doesn't hit his pulse bomb, there's just not a lot of lethal punching power on the ground to burst things down. The comp is really good at swarming and sustaining, but against Valkyrie, you kind of need some oomph to burn through those reses and somehow still have man advantage, and if you can't do that, well, you're just always going to lose against the Valk. But because they're not running a Mercy on their own, then they're stronger in the oncoming retake, because in a normal mid fight, Mercy still is kind of the weaker support. That's the thing. The Mercy Valk is going to almost guarantee an ult fight, but every time the Mayhem find themselves without Valk, it looks like they can't win the fight because the swarming playstyle coming from the Fuel makes most of their targets just untouchable. And with all that massive mobility, you can very easily get on the Mercy and find those squishy targets that you want to kill, minimizing the impact that the Florida Mayhem's tanks have. And I think as well, the Roadhog pick from them is quite risky. I think oftentimes a lot of players think that Roadhog hook counters mobility heroes, and it does if you hit hooks very reliably. Missing a key hook means the Roadhog just sort of stands there and doesn't do anything, doesn't make space, doesn't deal critical damage, and he's just an ult battery for the enemy team, and they just can swarm around him. But the problem is, every tank is going to have this problem against this swarm comp because it kind of just shows us the normal principles of what old school dive did to just about every tank. If there's just too much mobility, well, you can't get your tank in the right position, and you just have to play dive tanks of your own to be able to try to win the footsie battle with them, because any tank that isn't a dive tank gets danced around. That's what the swarm comp looks like when it's working, a team comp that excels in the mid fight and is going to need some extreme coordination to have a chance in an ult fight against a Mercy Valk. But if Mercy gets a bit of a nerf, you might see this comp start to resurge as being a new school dive comp option, going all in on the mobility, really utilizing the Moira for her aggressive mid-fight mobility as well. Now we're going to take a look back at that Junkertown game, and seeing the principles of it working, we're going to try to apply it to the failures it had on Junkertown and probably what the Fuel were going for when trying to pick it. It looks a lot stranger on attack than it does defense, because on defense, you can kind of see how this would be able to work against the Bastion comp that we've covered ad nauseum on this channel, of course. I hope you guys would consider yourselves anti-Bastion cheese experts at this point, but you can envision this team comp working to be able to disrupt the Bastion and pretty much just avoid its line of fire. An enemy Bastion wants targets that it can lock down. Like if you're a Rhine and you can't quickly get out of the way, well, infinite damage is coming your way, your shield's gonna break and you're gonna die. But this deathmatchy approach to this team comp means that the Dal's Fuel can split around, and it nearly ends up working. The only problem is Manitin wins on the Roadhog duel, but I think if you imagine a main tank in that slot instead of the Roadhog, you probably sustain long enough to be able to edge out this fight. If they just had an Orisa with a shield there, and you had a tanking presence that didn't die, this team fight probably doesn't crumble in the way that it does. I think the problem is a lot of pros are utilizing Moira more so for her bursts of impact to both attack and to clutch heal. The only problem is if the Moira misses the opportunity to save the Roadhog's life here, it kind of just crumbles the entire fight. Yeah, Custa got like a few frags on the back end, but losing your front line loses you the whole fight. But I think part of that problem also comes down to not having a shield to protect yourself from hooks and range damage. But on the oncoming retake, well, Effect just kills everybody, which I know is a meme and one that is going to live on through the Overwatch League. If you don't know, Effect has to be either in your top 3 tracers in the world, if not number 1. I think he's number 1 because Effect does things that no other player can do on Tracer. He looks like Soon in the Rogue era where no one knew how to deal with Soon's Tracer. He made the biggest impact plays ever, oftentimes with some key pulse bombs that utterly carried fights. And the funny thing is, in the preseason, Effect looked like he was trying to waste his pulse bombs, and he still was carrying. That's the crazy thing. Yeah, I actually think Effect was trying to do pulse bomb trick shots instead of landing easy ones, because I think the team was taking this a bit more as practice than a serious match, but I'm not exactly sure. The point being, Effect is so dangerous on Tracer that the Dallas Fuel can start to run team comps like this that requires Effect to be the best Tracer in the world. That's the thing with this Swarm comp, where no one else can really pop off other than Tracer. So if you just make a bunch of noise with your other characters, and if Tracer doesn't get bursted down, Effect's eventually going to win the fight for you. And enough razzle dazzle in the mid fight gives him the space to be able to do that. The only problem is I don't know if I'm convinced this is a good idea at all on Junkertown, which is basically a lane. That's why those Death Ball Bastion comps work so well, because if you're forced into a straight up horizontal team fight, the one with more firepower, more greed, and more death ball is likely just going to win. There's not a lot of map to be able to maneuver around. On first there is, but on streets it gets really claustrophobic, and that's where the comp starts to struggle again. And even going into third here, you can just kind of see the shortcomings of Moira, because if you're thinking that Moira is just going to give you all the healing, even without a Bastion, the Mayhem are able to just lane their damage into these set engagements, and Moira just can't heal enough. She heals like almost infinite amounts, but the problem is you need other utility in order to win team fights right now in the current meta, namely damage amp, res attrition, Valkyrie. Raw healing just doesn't really do it a lot of the time, and I really think the benefit of trying to use Moira in the swarmy way is getting her in the backline and getting burst damage with her damage orbs, actually, because the healing just isn't enough. You kind of need a burst of impact and using her mobility, and I don't know if Junkertown's the map to display that. Now we're going to move on to another team comp, which surprised a lot of the esports viewers. Oasis is known as a pharmacy map. You are expected to have to run it, and we've seen Seagull run the Pharah on Oasis to great effect. In fact, I've made a video about it and the big plays that he had going onto the Pharah in Contender Season 1, but this time, instead, they're going for the Orisa Hog corner of the point hold. This is spectacular because even though Linkser finds the opening on effect, well, effect's run back is going to come back in time before it matters anyway, and the problem with Pharah against this tank combination, sure, they often won't kill the Pharah themselves, where a D.Va is the tank that you would want to go duel a Pharah. The problem is Pharah's damage is not enough to chew through Roadhog or Orisa, or Orisa's barrier. She just can't do enough damage for it to matter, and even with a man advantage, this Orisa Hog tank combo is so tanky that if you don't have enough punching power, it doesn't matter if you're down a man because their point presence is so strong. Now, I think the success that this comp had more came down to how well it counter strats the more or less balanced team comp that the Outlaws come out with, which is basically standard pharmacy dive. And I think what this shows us is the big benefit to defensive characters nowadays, where pure mobility just isn't good enough. Here on the dive, the Outlaws pop all their resources, and Dallas does a pretty good job at peeling back. The problem that the Dallas Field team comp creates for the Outlaws, they have characters that you have to go kill, but they're so powerful at close range that this balanced dive comp from the Outlaws, again, doesn't have the punching power to really win duels quickly. It sort of has to swarm, and between Custa on the Zenyatta and Seagull on the Junkrat, the damage output that this team has is immense. So as long as that they have strong positioning and good peel to not get overwhelmed and flanked, their comp is just simply going to do more damage. And everything but the Pharah wants to play at close range. But the Dallas Fuel tank line, as well as Junkrat, is just going to counter all of those close range threats. Nobody can really get in close without getting their head blown off, and time again, that's how these engagements go. I think looking back, I would actually have liked to see a single tank come out of Houston Outlaws and just place in a soldier in the flex slot, or even just a single support flexing in the soldier, depending on which one of their players is best at it, because what they need is more range damage to be able to kill the shield before engaging, but they just don't have enough range damage with this mobility dive comp, and they're playing the team comp right, it's just the wrong comp for the job. The only way they could make this dive comp work is if they bursted down one of the supports or Seagull on the Junkrat, but there's just too much fortifying him in the corner to be able to do that, which is why if they had a bigger range damage threat, it would put more requirement of effect to go duel that character, and the more you split that team comp apart, the better chance you're gonna have. If you can avoid going close range against it and poke down the shield to make those openings to force the Dallas Fuel to back up, that's where you're gonna have your openings, whereas they just never really could find a good engagement going into it without that range damage threat. Sure, you got the Lucio speed boost to get in on close range. Well, welcome to Junkrat and Roadhog Town. Now, I think even the Outlaws are going to feel surprised watching the Dallas Fuel come out with the same comp again. I mean, this is the jump pad map. This is a Pharah paradise, right? Well, no, they just set up their corner of the point hold tactics yet again, and this time we get to see the beauty of some classic Taimu Roadhog play as well. I think just like putting him on the Sombra, having a player on Roadhog as as good as Taimu really makes this team comp work. You see the Houston Outlaws trying to buzz around and find a good engagement, but the Fuel just have enough sustain and enough big burst damage threats between the Roadhog Hook and Seagull that the Outlaws are spinning around in circles with nothing to find, and that's why I think they need the soldier swap to come in, because they have all this open space. They have the entire map almost, the Houston Outlaws do, but they can't do anything with it because they don't have the damage to burst through anything. And all the while, in the meantime, as the Outlaws try to jockey for positioning, the positioning doesn't get you anywhere because the CC and burst is just too strong from the Fuel. So although this comp failed to work on the first point where it was more or less close, the Fuel really got their act together and played a scary level of synergy to sustain and peel and retreat when they had to and keep their lives up to eventually just grind out this Oasis map on basically strategy alone. Now, granted, I don't think we would see this same scenario get replicated, because if Jake was in the lineup, you'd have to think that there would be some shot calling swaps get made, and that's another big reason beyond just his mechanical ability that you probably are going to see Jake get a starting spot on the Outlaws almost 100% of the time, because bar the Tracer, what do they have to deal with Jake's Junkrat from the Fuel? Nothing. Getting greedy with range damage, I think, is the key to really make the Orisa Hog team comp look kind of silly, because you can play outside of its range, burn its shields down, and win with ranged firepower, but they just didn't have the personnel or the right swaps at the right time to even compete against it. Guys, that's it for today's video. What did you think of these wacky team comps from the Dallas Fuel? If you enjoy it when pro teams try something new for once, be sure to leave the video a like, because I do as well. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, because we upload each and every day, so you're gonna wanna hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.